Sarah traced the lines on the whiteboard with a dry erase marker, connecting disparate news articles with frantic energy. The board was a chaotic web of red and black ink, a visual representation of the rabbit hole she'd fallen down. A seemingly isolated banking scandal in Luxembourg. A series of suspiciously timed factory fires in Southeast Asia. A sudden and violent coup in a small African nation. Separately, they were just news stories, tragedies, unfortunate events. But Sarah, with her relentless curiosity and innate ability to sniff out a cover-up, felt a disturbing connection humming beneath the surface. She'd been working on this for months, sacrificing sleep, sanity, and her social life. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary of order, had become a war room, littered with research papers, half-empty coffee cups, and discarded takeout containers. Her editor at the Global Observer, bless his weary soul, was starting to get antsy that he'd given her leeway, trusting her instincts. But even he needed something concrete soon. The problem wasn't finding the individual pieces. It was assembling them into a coherent picture. It was like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing, and the ones she had were warped and misleading. She knew, deep in her gut, that these events weren't random. Someone or some group was pulling the strings. But who? And why? The shadowy organization, as she'd begun to call it in her notes, was incredibly adept at hiding its tracks. Every lead she chased seemed to dead end, every potential source clammed up at the last minute, and every digital trail vanished into the ether. It was like they were anticipating her every move, erasing their presence before she could even get close. Frustration gnawed at her. She felt like she was standing on the precipice of a monumental discovery, a story that could shake the foundations of global power. But she was also acutely aware of the danger she was courting. This wasn't just about corporate greed or political corruption. This felt bigger, darker, more insidious. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that every click of her keyboard, every phone call, every meeting was being scrutinized. A chill ran down her spine, a primal instinct warning her to tread carefully. She was onto something huge, something that powerful people wanted to keep buried, and she was running out of time. The breakthrough came in the form of a leaked internal memo, a document so heavily encrypted it took Sarah weeks to crack. It was buried deep within the digital archives of a defunct Swiss bank, a bank that had mysteriously collapsed after a series of unfortunate investment decisions. The memo itself was innocuous enough, a record of a transaction, a wire transfer of an obscene amount of money from one shell corporation to another. But the names attached to those corporations, that was the key. Sarah spent days cross-referencing those names with her existing research. It was like watching a constellation of stars align, previously scattered points of light suddenly forming a recognizable pattern. The shell corporations were linked to individuals who had profited handsomely from the economic crash in '08. They were also connected to companies that had benefited from the political instability in the African nation. And, perhaps most disturbingly, they were tied to individuals who had been quietly buying up land in the areas affected by the factory fires. The pattern was undeniable. Economic crashes, political assassinations disguised as accidents, and the subtle manipulation of social unrest, all orchestrated to benefit a select group of powerful elites. They were playing a global game of chess, using human lives as pawns to consolidate their wealth and power. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about money. It was about control of resources, control of governments, control of the very fabric of society. And they were willing to do anything. To maintain that control. As Sarah dug deeper, she uncovered evidence of a sophisticated network of operatives, individuals with specialized skills, hackers, assassins, propagandists, all working in the shadows to execute the organization's agenda. They were masters of deception, able to manipulate information, sow discord, and eliminate threats with chilling efficiency. She realized that she wasn't just investigating a conspiracy. She was exposing a war, a silent war waged against the world, by a group of individuals who believed they were above the law, and she, Sarah, armed with nothing but her laptop and her unwavering commitment to the truth, had inadvertently stumbled onto the battlefield. The stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined, and the enemy was far more powerful than she had anticipated. The game had changed. It wasn't just about uncovering the story anymore. It was about surviving long enough to tell it. The first sign was subtle, easily dismissed as a coincidence, a flat tire on her way to meet a source, a series of missed calls from her editor, her email account acting strangely, sending out garbled messages she hadn't written. She brushed them off, attributing them to bad luck and technological glitches. But the incidents began to multiply, each one a little more unsettling than the last. Her apartment was broken into, but nothing was stolen. The only thing disturbed was her research, papers scattered haphazardly across the floor, the whiteboard wiped clean, a clear message. "We know what you're doing." Then came the smear campaign. Anonymous articles appeared online, questioning her credibility, accusing her of plagiarism and fabricating sources. Old tweets were dredged up and twisted to paint her as a radical extremist. Her reputation, carefully built over years of hard work, was being systematically dismantled. Her editor, while still supportive, was growing increasingly concerned about the potential legal ramifications. The hacking intensified. Her phone was tapped, her computer infected with spyware. Every email, every text message, every search query was being monitored. She felt like she was living in a digital fishbowl, her every move under constant surveillance. The subtle threats escalated to overt danger. A shadowy figure started appearing in her peripheral vision, always just out of reach, a silent observer watching her every move. She found a dead bird on her doorstep, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle. A chilling message. "This could be you." One evening, as she was walking home from the office, a black car swerved onto the sidewalk, narrowly missing her. She dove out of the way, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an attempt on her life. She knew then that she was in serious danger. The elites weren't just trying to discredit her. They were trying to silence her, permanently. They had the resources, the connections, and the ruthlessness to make her disappear without a trace. Fear warred with her. Determination. She couldn't back down now. She was too close to the truth. But she also knew that she couldn't fight them alone. She needed help, someone who could protect her, someone who could navigate the shadows and expose the truth without becoming a casualty. She needed a shield, and she had a name in mind, a ghost from the past, a man who knew the dark side of power all too well. Jason Statham. Jason Statham, the name conjured images of brutal efficiency, cold calculation, and a past shrouded in secrecy. He was a ghost, a legend whispered in the hushed tones of intelligence circles, a former Black Ops agent, the best of the best, until he vanished without a trace a decade ago. Some said he was dead. Others claimed he'd gone rogue. The truth, as Sarah discovered, was more complicated. He was living off-grid, deep in the unforgiving wilderness of the Canadian Rockies. A small, secluded cabin was his sanctuary, a refuge from the ghosts that haunted him. He chopped wood, fished for his supper, and lived a life of quiet solitude, trying to bury the memories of the things he had done, the lives he had taken. His past was inextricably linked to the very organization Sarah was investigating. He had been one of their enforcers, a highly skilled operative tasked with eliminating threats, manipulating events, and ensuring the smooth execution of their agenda. He knew their methods, their weaknesses, their secrets. He had been one of them. But something had changed. A mission gone wrong. An innocent life lost, a flicker of conscience in the darkness. Whatever the catalyst, Statham had had enough. He couldn't stomach the corruption, the cruelty, the utter disregard for human life. He tried to leave, but they wouldn't let him go. He knew too much. He'd had to fake his own death, sever all ties, and disappear completely. He lived with the constant fear of being discovered, of the organization coming after him. He knew they never forgot, never forgave. That he had tried to atone for his sins, to live a life of peace and quiet, but the past refused to stay buried. Sarah found him after weeks of relentless searching, following a trail of breadcrumbs left by former contacts and informants. She arrived at his cabin unannounced, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to expect, whether he would be a hardened killer or a broken man. All she knew was that he was her only hope. He opened the door, his eyes narrowed, his hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife strapped to his thigh. He looked older, weathered, but the lethal edge was still there, simmering beneath the surface. He was a dangerous man, a man who had seen too much, a man who had nothing left to lose. And Sarah knew that convincing him to help her would be the biggest challenge of her life. The silence hung heavy in the air between them. Broken only by the crackling fire in the hearth, Sarah stood her ground. Despite the intensity of Statham's gaze, she laid out her evidence. The leaked memo, the connections she had made, the threats she had received. She spoke with a quiet conviction, her voice unwavering despite the fear that gnawed at her. Statham listened, his expression unreadable. He already knew most of it. He had been monitoring the situation, watching from the shadows. Ever since he had picked up whispers of her investigation through his old network of contacts, he knew that she was walking into a hornet's nest, stirring up a force far more dangerous than she could possibly imagine. He knew, because he had been that force. When she finished, he simply shook his head. "You're playing with fire, lady. You have no idea what you're up against." "I know it's dangerous," Sarah replied, "but someone has to do something. These people are destroying lives, manipulating the world for their own gain. I can't just stand by and watch." "Then you're a fool," Statham said, his voice hard. "This isn't a game. It's a war. And you're a civilian, outgunned and outmatched." He turned away, dismissing her. "I can't help you. I won't." Sarah refused to give up. "Why not? You know what they're capable of. You used to be one of them. Don't you have a responsibility to stop them?" Statham's face darkened. "Responsibility? I forfeited that a long time ago. My hands are already stained with too much blood. I won't add yours to the list." He was haunted by his past, by the things he had done, the people he had hurt. He couldn't bear the thought of being responsible for another death, especially not hers. He had tried to bury his past, to find redemption in solitude. But Sarah's presence had ripped open old wounds, forcing him to confront the darkness he had tried so hard to escape. "I'm not asking you to fight my battles," Sarah said, her voice softening. "I'm just asking for your help. I need your knowledge, your skills. I can't do this alone." Statham remained unmoved. "Go home, Sarah. Forget about this. It's not worth your life." He turned his back, ending the conversation. He wouldn't be drawn back in. The price was too high. He had already paid it once. He wasn't willing to pay it again. He knew that helping her would only lead to more bloodshed, more pain, more death, and he couldn't live with that. Sarah left Statham's cabin with a heavy heart, the weight of her impending doom pressing down on her. She knew he was right, that she was out of her depth, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of something monumental. She couldn't just walk away. She drove back to the nearest town, a small, isolated community nestled in the mountains. She checked into a motel, the only option available, and tried to get some sleep, but her mind was racing. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside her window sent shivers down her spine. She should have listened to Statham. The attack came in the dead of night. She was jolted awake by the sound of breaking glass. Two men, masked and armed, burst into her room. They moved with a practiced efficiency, their eyes cold and devoid of emotion. They were professionals. Sarah screamed, scrambling out of bed, but it was too late. They were upon her, their intent clear. This wasn't about intimidation. This was about elimination. Suddenly, a figure crashed through the window behind them, a whirlwind of controlled fury. It was Statham. He moved with a speed and precision that defied belief, disarming one of the men with a single, swift movement, and then using him as a shield against the other. A brutal fight ensued. A ballet of violence played out in the cramped motel room. Statham was outnumbered, but his years of training and experience were evident. He fought with a ferocity born of desperation, protecting Sarah with every fiber of his being. He dispatched the first assailant quickly, a broken neck ending the fight abruptly. The second man, more skilled, put up a tougher resistance. But Statham was relentless. His movements precise and deadly. He dodged a knife thrust, delivering a devastating blow to the man's throat. The attacker crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. Statham stood over them, his chest heaving, his face a mask of grim determination. He had saved her life, but at what cost? "They knew I was here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "They were waiting for me." "They're always watching," Statham replied, his gaze hardening. "They have eyes everywhere." He knew that this attack wasn't just about silencing Sarah. It was also about sending him a message. They knew he was still alive. They knew he was a threat. He looked at Sarah, her face pale with fear. He knew he couldn't leave her alone. He had tried to stay out of it, to protect himself from the darkness. But he couldn't stand by and watch her die. He had made a choice that would change everything. "Get your things," he said. "We're leaving. Now." They drove through the night, leaving the small town behind, heading towards an unknown destination. Statham was silent, his face etched with a mixture of guilt and determination. He had saved Sarah's life, but he knew that wasn't enough. They were now both targets, hunted by a powerful and ruthless organization. Sarah broke the silence. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving me." Statham grunted in response, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. They won't stop until we're both dead." "Then we have to stop them," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We have to expose them. The world needs to know what they're doing." Statham shook his head. "You don't understand. They're too powerful. We can't win." "Maybe not," Sarah conceded. "But we can make them pay. We can expose their crimes, reveal their secrets. We can give the world a chance to fight back." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "You know how they operate. You know their weaknesses. You can help me do this." Statham hesitated. He knew she was right. He knew the organization better than anyone. He knew their vulnerabilities, their blind spots. He could help her expose them. But doing so would mean confronting his past, reliving the horrors he had tried so hard to forget. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why are you risking your life for this story?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Sarah replied simply. "Because if we don't stand up to them, who will? Because the truth matters." Her words resonated with him, stirring something deep within his soul. He had spent years trying to atone for his sins, to find redemption in solitude. But maybe, just maybe, this was his chance. Maybe this was his opportunity to finally make amends for the wrongs he had committed. He looked at Sarah, her face illuminated by the headlights. He saw her courage, her determination, her unwavering commitment to justice. He knew that he couldn't let her face this alone. "All right," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll help you." Sarah smiled, a glimmer of hope shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Jason. I knew I could count on you." "Don't get any ideas," Statham said, his tone hardening. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for myself. I need to put an end to this, once and for all." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I'll be your shield, Sarah. I'll protect you. But you have to listen to me. You have to trust me. This is going to be a long and dangerous road, and we may not both make it out alive." The next few weeks were a blur of constant movement, a desperate race against time. Statham, drawing on his years of experience in the shadows, kept them one step ahead of their pursuers. He knew their tactics, their resources, their methods of tracking and surveillance. He was a ghost, and he taught Sarah how to become one too. They abandoned their phones, their credit cards, their identities. They traveled on back roads using cash, staying in cheap motels and abandoned safe houses. Statham taught Sarah how to spot surveillance, how to blend in with a crowd, how to defend herself. He transformed her from a desk-bound journalist into a resourceful survivor. Their pursuers were relentless, a team of highly skilled operatives dispatched by the elite organization. They were experts in tracking, interrogation, and elimination. They were ruthless and efficient, leaving a trail of bodies in their wake. Statham recognized some of them, former colleagues, men he had trained himself. He knew what they were capable of. Despite the constant threat, Sarah refused to abandon her investigation. She used Statham's contacts and knowledge to uncover more evidence, piecing together the puzzle of the organization's global conspiracy. They followed a trail of breadcrumbs left by whistleblowers and defectors, gathering documents, recordings, and testimonies that exposed the organization's crimes. They visited anonymous sources in dingy apartments, met with former operatives in hidden locations, and hacked into secure servers to retrieve classified information. Each piece of evidence brought them closer to the truth, but it also made them more vulnerable. They learned to trust each other, relying on each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. Statham protected Sarah with his life, using his skills and experience to keep her safe. Sarah, in turn, challenged Statham's cynicism, reminding him of the importance of truth and justice. They were two unlikely allies, bound together by a shared purpose. They were on the run, hunted by powerful enemies, but they refused to give up. They knew that the fate of the world depended on their ability to expose the truth, and they were willing to risk everything to do so. The chase was on, and the stakes were higher than ever. Their journey took them across continents, chasing whispers and fragmented clues, from the bustling streets of Hong Kong to the ancient ruins of Rome. They followed a trail of breadcrumbs left by those who had dared to defy the organization. In Hong Kong, they met with a former accountant, a nervous man hiding in a cramped apartment, who provided them with a coded ledger detailing the organization's illicit financial transactions. The ledger was a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts, a testament to the organization's mastery of financial manipulation. Statham skillfully extracted the information, knowing the right questions to ask and how to interpret the coded entries. In Rome, they sought out a retired intelligence officer, a woman living in a secluded villa, who possessed a trove of classified documents detailing the organization's political assassinations. The documents were heavily redacted, but Statham was able to decipher the hidden messages, revealing the names of the victims and the perpetrators. Sarah painstakingly cross-referenced the information, connecting the assassinations to specific political and economic events. They communicated through coded messages, using burner phones and encrypted email accounts. They met their contacts in secret locations, always wary of being followed or betrayed. Statham's instincts were their greatest asset, his ability to sense danger and anticipate their enemies' moves. They discovered a network of safe houses scattered across the globe, secret locations used by the organization to conduct clandestine meetings and store sensitive information. Statham knew many of these locations from his past, allowing them to access them undetected. Each location revealed a new layer of the conspiracy, exposing the organization's involvement in everything from drug trafficking and arms dealing to political corruption and social engineering. They uncovered evidence of rigged elections, engineered economic crises, and manufactured social unrest, all orchestrated to benefit the organization's agenda. As they delved deeper into the conspiracy, they realized that the organization's reach was far greater than they had ever imagined. It was a global network of power and influence, operating in the shadows, manipulating events to control the world, and they, Sarah and Statham, were the only ones who stood in their way. The weight of the world rested on their shoulders, and they knew that they couldn't afford to fail. The chase continued, relentless and unforgiving, leading them closer to the heart of the conspiracy. Their relentless pursuit of the truth had stirred up a hornet's nest, and now the hornets were coming for Statham. His past, which he had tried so hard to bury, was resurfacing with a vengeance. Former allies, men and women he had trusted with his life, emerged from the shadows, offering him deals, threatening him with exposure, trying to manipulate him back into the fold. In Berlin, they were cornered by Anya, a former colleague and lover, a woman who knew Statham better than anyone. She offered him a way out, a chance to return to the organization, to reclaim his former position of power. She argued that he was wasting his talents, fighting a losing battle, and that he could do more good from the inside. She tempted him with promises of wealth, influence, and a chance to rewrite his past. Statham refused, his loyalty to Sarah and his commitment to justice outweighing any temptation to return to his old life. He knew that the organization was beyond redemption, that it was a force of evil that needed to be destroyed, that he couldn't betray Sarah, not after everything they had been through. In Marrakesh, they were ambushed by Hassan, a ruthless mercenary who had a personal vendetta against Statham. Hassan blamed Statham for the death of his brother, a fellow operative who had been killed during a mission gone wrong. Hassan offered Statham a choice: betray Sarah and hand over the evidence, or face a slow and agonizing death. Hassan tried to exploit Statham's guilt, reminding him of the innocent lives he had taken, the blood on his hands. He argued that Statham was a monster, that he didn't deserve redemption, and that he should embrace his darkness. He attempted to turn Statham against Sarah, suggesting that she was using him, manipulating him for her own purposes. Statham resisted Hassan's manipulation, his resolve strengthened by his bond with Sarah. He knew that Hassan was trying to break him, to undermine his confidence, to make him doubt himself. But he refused to succumb to the darkness. He was no longer the man he used to be. He had changed, and he wouldn't let his past define him. These encounters tested Statham's loyalty and resolve, forcing him to confront his demons and reaffirm his commitment to the truth. He had to choose between his past and his future, between darkness and light, and he chose to stand with Sarah, to fight for justice, to risk everything for a chance at redemption. The stakes were higher than ever, and the battle for Statham's soul was just as important as the fight against the organization. The shared danger, the constant adrenaline, and the unwavering trust they placed in each other forged an unbreakable bond between Sarah and Statham. They were two very different people, from vastly different worlds, but they found solace and strength in each other's company. Sarah saw beyond Statham's hardened exterior, recognizing the pain and regret that haunted him. She admired his courage, his loyalty, and his unwavering commitment to protecting her. She challenged his cynicism, reminding him of the good that still existed in the world, the hope that could still be found. Statham, in turn, saw Sarah's unwavering determination, her unwavering belief in the truth. He admired her resilience, her intelligence, and her compassion. He found himself drawn to her warmth, her optimism, and her unwavering faith in humanity. They learned to rely on each other's strengths, compensating for each other's weaknesses. Statham protected Sarah with his skills and experience, keeping her safe from physical harm. Sarah, in turn, provided Statham with the emotional support he needed to confront his past and embrace his future. They spent countless hours talking, sharing their stories, their fears, and their hopes. They discovered a shared sense of humor, a way to laugh even in the face of danger. They found comfort in each other's presence, a sense of belonging that they had both been missing for so long. Subtle romantic tension began to simmer beneath the surface. They were both drawn to each other, but they knew that a relationship would be dangerous, that it would complicate their mission and make them more vulnerable. They tried to ignore the feelings, to focus on the task at hand, but the attraction was undeniable. There were moments of unspoken intimacy, glances that lingered a little too long, touches that felt a little too warm. They shared stolen kisses in the dead of night, moments of passion and vulnerability that reminded them of their humanity. But they knew that their priority had to be the mission, that they couldn't afford to be distracted by their feelings. Their bond deepened with each passing day, transforming them from reluctant allies into trusted friends, perhaps even something more. They were two souls drawn together by fate, bound by a shared purpose, and united by a growing love that threatened to consume them both. The stakes were higher than ever, and the lines between duty and desire were becoming increasingly blurred. Their relentless pursuit led them to Geneva, Switzerland, the heart of the organization's financial empire. They had been following a lead about a disgruntled former board member, a man named Klaus Richter, who had fallen out of favor with the organization and was now living in hiding. Reaching Richter was a challenge in itself. He was paranoid, heavily guarded, and reluctant to trust anyone. Statham used his connections to bypass Richter's security, gaining access to his heavily fortified villa on the outskirts of the city. Richter was initially hostile, suspicious of their motives, but when Sarah presented him with the evidence they had gathered, he realized that they were the only ones who could expose the organization and bring them to justice. He agreed to help them, offering them a piece of evidence that could unravel the entire conspiracy. A digital recording of a secret meeting between the organization's leaders, outlining their plans for global domination. The recording was damning, a confession of their crimes, a blueprint for their future. IT confirmed everything Sarah had suspected. Everything Statham had known at IT was the smoking gun they needed to bring down the organization once and for all. But acquiring the recording came at a price. Richter had been under surveillance, and their meeting had been compromised. As they left the villa, they were ambushed by a team of the organization's operatives, led by a ruthless assassin known as the Serpent. A fierce firefight erupted, Statham using his skills to protect Sarah and Richter while trying to escape. They managed to evade their pursuers, but Richter was mortally wounded. Before he died, he handed Sarah the digital recording, urging her to expose the truth. Now, they possessed the one piece of evidence that could bring down the entire organization. But they were also bigger targets than ever before. The organization would stop at nothing to retrieve the recording and silence them permanently. They were running out of time, and the enemy was closing in. The final battle was about to begin. With the recording in their possession, Sarah and Statham knew they had to get it out of Geneva and out of the organization's reach. They made their way to a small, private airfield, hoping to charter a flight to a safe location where they could analyze the recording and prepare it for release. But the Serpent was waiting for them. He had anticipated their move, and he had a team of operatives positioned to intercept them. A high-stakes chase ensued through the winding streets of Geneva, Statham skillfully maneuvering their vehicle, dodging bullets and evading pursuers. They reached the airfield, but their plane was blocked by a convoy of black SUVs. A brutal fight erupted, Statham facing off against the Serpent and his team. Sarah, armed with a pistol, provided cover fire, protecting Statham from the relentless assault. Statham's skills were pushed to the limit. He fought with a ferocity born of desperation, using his training and experience to outmaneuver his opponents. He dodged bullets, disarmed attackers, and delivered devastating blows with precision and speed. The Serpent was a formidable opponent, a master of martial arts and a ruthless killer. They engaged in a tense standoff, a deadly dance of skill and strategy. The fight spilled onto the tarmac, amidst the parked planes and fuel trucks. Explosions rocked the airfield as the operatives detonated explosives, trying to flush out Statham and Sarah. The chaos was overwhelming, the danger palpable. Statham managed to disarm the Serpent, engaging him in hand-to-hand combat. The two men were evenly matched, each pushing the other to their limits. The fight was brutal and unforgiving. Clash of wills and ideologies. Sarah, witnessing the carnage, realized that they couldn't win this fight. They were outnumbered and outgunned. They needed to escape to get the recording to safety. She made a daring decision, hijacking a small airplane and taxiing it towards Statham and the Serpent. Statham, seeing Sarah's move, knew what he had to do. He disengaged from the Serpent, leaping onto the wing of the plane as Sarah accelerated down the runway. The Serpent and his operatives opened fire, bullets whizzing past their heads. With a burst of speed, Sarah lifted the plane into the air, narrowly avoiding the pursuing vehicles. They were airborne, but they were far from safe. The Serpent was still on their trail, determined to retrieve the recording and silence them forever. The chase had just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. Flying low, dodging radar, and constantly scanning the skies for pursuers, Sarah and Statham knew they couldn't stay airborne forever. The plane was low on fuel, and the Serpent would be hot on their trail. They needed to find a safe place to land and decide on their next move. They landed on a remote airstrip in Iceland, a desolate and windswept landscape far from the prying eyes of the organization. They secured a vehicle and found refuge in an abandoned farmhouse, a temporary sanctuary where they could assess their situation. They knew that they couldn't keep running forever. They had the recording, the smoking gun that could expose the organization's crimes to the world. But how could they get it out there, to a place where it couldn't be suppressed or controlled? They considered several options. Sarah's original plan was to go to her editor at the Global Observer, but she knew that the organization likely had influence over the media, that they could easily discredit her or suppress the story. They needed a platform that was independent and censored, and beyond the organization's reach. Statham suggested leaking the recording to WikiLeaks, a controversial but effective way to disseminate sensitive information. Sarah hesitated, concerned about the potential fallout, the risk of exposing innocent individuals and jeopardizing national security. They debated the pros and cons, weighing the risks and benefits. They realized that they had to act quickly, that the organization was closing in, and that they couldn't afford to wait. They decided to take a calculated risk, to leak the recording to a trusted source who could verify its authenticity and release it to the public. Sarah remembered a contact she had made during her investigation. A reclusive journalist named Elias Thorne, who ran an independent news website dedicated to exposing corruption and injustice. Thorne was fiercely independent, incorruptible, and unafraid to challenge the powerful. He was their best hope. They contacted Thorne through an encrypted channel, providing him with a sample of the recording and a summary of their findings. Thorne was initially skeptical, but after verifying the authenticity of the recording, he agreed to help them. He promised to release the recording to the public, along with a detailed report on the organization's crimes. They had made their decision. They were putting their fate, and the fate of the world, in the hands of a stranger. They had no idea what would happen next, but they knew that they had done everything they could to expose the truth. The world was about to change, and they were ready to face the consequences. The moment Thorne released the recording and Sarah's report, all hell broke loose. The internet exploded with outrage, disbelief, and conspiracy theories. The recording was damning, but the organization wasn't going to let it go unchallenged. They launched a massive counteroffensive, using their vast resources and influence to discredit Sarah and Statham and manipulate public opinion. The mainstream media, heavily influenced by the organization's propaganda, began to question the authenticity of the recording, dismissing it as a fabrication or a hoax. They ran stories questioning Sarah's credibility, highlighting her past mistakes and portraying her as a reckless and unreliable journalist. Statham's past was dredged up, his former crimes and affiliations used to paint him as a dangerous and untrustworthy individual. He was labeled terrorist, a mercenary, and a traitor, his motives questioned and his character assassinated. The organization's operatives launched a sophisticated disinformation campaign, flooding the internet with fake news and conspiracy theories designed to confuse and mislead the public. They created fake websites, social media accounts, and online forums to spread their propaganda. They targeted Thorne, attempting to discredit him and silence his voice. They hacked his website, threatened his family, and launched a smear campaign against him, accusing him of being a conspiracy theorist and a puppet of foreign powers. The public was bombarded with conflicting information, making it difficult to discern the truth. The organization's propaganda was subtle and insidious, designed to sow doubt and division, to undermine trust in the media and government. Sarah and Statham found themselves under attack from all sides. They were hunted by the organization's operatives, discredited by the media, and targeted by online trolls. They were isolated, alone, and facing a powerful enemy that was determined to destroy them. But they refused to give up. They knew that the truth was on their side, and they were determined to fight for it. They used their skills and resources to counter the organization's propaganda, to expose their lies and reveal their crimes. They were engaged in a battle for the hearts and minds of the public, a battle that would determine the fate of the world. The stakes were higher than ever, and the fight was far from over. Despite the organization's relentless counteroffensive, Sarah and Statham refused to be silenced. They knew that the truth was their most powerful weapon, and they were determined to get their story heard, no matter the cost. They used their skills and resources to bypass the mainstream media, reaching out to independent journalists, bloggers, and activists who were willing to listen. They provided them with additional evidence, corroborating testimonies, and expert analysis, building a solid case that could withstand the organization's attacks. Sarah, drawing on her journalistic skills, wrote articles, gave interviews, and participated in online forums, countering the organization's propaganda and presenting the truth in a clear and compelling way. She reminded people of the facts, the evidence, and the victims of the organization's crimes. Statham, using his contacts and knowledge of the organization's inner workings, exposed their lies, revealed their secrets, and identified their key operatives. He provided information that helped to counter their disinformation campaign and expose their manipulation of the media. They reached out to former allies, individuals who had been harmed by the organization and were willing to speak out. They rallied whistleblowers, defectors, and victims, giving them a platform to share their stories and expose the organization's crimes. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. People started to question the organization's narrative, to see through their lies and propaganda. The truth began to emerge, spreading like wildfire through the internet, reaching millions of people around the world. The organization's influence over the media began to wane, as independent journalists and bloggers gained credibility and trust. The mainstream media was forced to acknowledge the truth, to report on the organization's crimes and the evidence that supported them. The public outcry grew louder, demanding justice and accountability. Protests erupted in cities around the world, calling for the arrest and prosecution of the organization's leaders. Governments began to investigate the organization's activities, launching inquiries and initiating legal proceedings. Sarah and Statham had won a major victory in the battle for the hearts and minds of the public. They had exposed the truth, challenged the powerful, and inspired hope in a world that seemed increasingly hopeless. But they knew that the fight was far from over. The organization was still powerful, still dangerous, and still determined to silence them. The final confrontation was inevitable. The world was in turmoil. The revelations of the organization's crimes sent shockwaves through society, shattering trust in governments, institutions, and the media. The world was waking up, and it was not happy. Protests erupted in cities across the globe, from London to New York to Tokyo. People took to the streets, demanding justice, accountability, and an end to the organization's control. The protests were massive, diverse, and passionate, fueled by a shared sense of outrage and a desire for change. Governments were challenged, forced to respond to the public outcry. Some governments launched investigations, initiating legal proceedings against the organization and its leaders. Others, deeply compromised by the organization's influence, resisted the pressure, attempting to suppress the protests and protect the guilty. The organization, once seemingly invincible, began to crumble. Their power was diminished, their influence weakened, their secrets exposed. Their leaders were forced to flee, their assets were frozen, and their operatives were arrested. The internal conflicts within the organization intensified, as factions turned against each other, vying for power and attempting to distance themselves from the crimes. Whistleblowers and defectors came forward, providing additional evidence and exposing the organization's inner workings. The organization's propaganda machines sputtered and failed, unable to control the narrative or stem the tide of public opinion. The truth had been unleashed, and it was unstoppable. Sarah and Statham watched from the shadows, witnessing the impact of their actions. They had exposed the organization, challenged the powerful, and inspired a global movement for change. They had given the world a chance to fight back, and the world was taking it. But they knew that the organization was not yet defeated. Their leaders were still at large, their resources still vast, their operatives still active. The final confrontation was still to come, a showdown that would determine the fate of the world. Sarah and Statham prepared for the final battle, gathering their allies, consolidating their resources, and bracing themselves for the inevitable storm. They knew that the organization would not go down without a fight, that they would use every weapon at their disposal to protect their power and silence their enemies. But Sarah and Statham were ready. They had come too far, sacrificed too much to give up now. They were determined to see this through to the end, to bring the organization to justice and secure a future of freedom and peace for all. The trail led them to a secluded island in the Aegean Sea, a private sanctuary owned by the organization's elusive leader, a man known only as the Architect. This was where the organization's inner circle had gathered, hoping to weather the storm and regroup their forces. Infiltrating the island was a suicide mission, a task that seemed impossible. But Sarah and Statham had come too far to turn back now. They used Statham's knowledge of the organization's security protocols to bypass their defenses, sneaking onto the island undetected. They discovered a hidden underground bunker, a high-tech command center where the organization's leaders were plotting their next move. The Architect was there, along with his key lieutenants, including the Serpent, who had survived their encounter in Geneva. The final confrontation was inevitable. Statham faced off against the Serpent, engaging in a brutal and personal battle, a clash of skill and vengeance. Sarah, using her investigative skills, hacked into the organization's computer system, uncovering additional evidence of their crimes, including their plans for future manipulation and control. Statham battled the Serpent through the bunker, each strike filled with years of pent-up anger. This was more than just a fight. It was a reckoning. Statham had to face the man he once was, and all the darkness he had embraced. The Serpent fought with the cold precision of a machine, but Statham fought with a righteous fury. Sarah broadcasted the Architect's plans to the world, revealing his identity, his motives, and his crimes. She exposed the organization's network of influence, naming names and providing evidence that could be used to bring them to justice. The Architect, realizing that his plans were unraveling, confronted Sarah, attempting to silence her and regain control. But Sarah stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. She used her words as weapons, exposing the Architect's lies and challenging his twisted ideology. Statham finally overpowered the Serpent, ending the fight with a decisive blow. He turned to face the Architect, his eyes filled with determination. The final battle was about to begin, a showdown between good and evil, between freedom and control. The fate of the world hung in the balance. The architect, exposed and defeated, tried to escape, but Statham was too fast. He cornered him. His face a mask of righteous fury, and he had a choice to make. Kill the architect and end the organization's threat permanently, or bring him to justice and let the world decide his fate. Statham wrestled with his demons, the voices of his past urging him to take revenge. But he knew that killing the architect would make him no better than the organization he had fought so hard to destroy, and he made a decision. A choice that would define his future. He apprehended the architect, handing him over to the authorities who had arrived on the island, alerted by Sarah's broadcast. The architect and his lieutenants were arrested. Their reign of terror finally over. The world rejoiced. The conspiracy had been exposed, the perpetrators had been brought to justice, and the victims had been vindicated. The organization's network of influence was dismantled, their assets were seized, and their operatives were brought to trial. But the fight for truth and justice was far from over. The organization's legacy lived on, in the form of corrupted institutions, biased media, and lingering social divisions. The world had changed, but the challenges remained. Sarah and Statham knew that they couldn't rest on their laurels. They had to continue to fight for a better future, to hold the powerful accountable, and to inspire hope in a world that was still struggling to heal. They used their newfound platform to advocate for reforms, to promote transparency, and to empower marginalized communities. They supported independent journalism, investigative reporting, and grassroots activism. Statham, finally free from his past, dedicated his life to helping others, using his skills and experience to protect the vulnerable and fight injustice. He became a symbol of hope and redemption, inspiring others to confront their demons and embrace their potential for good. Sarah continued her work as an investigative journalist, exposing corruption, challenging the powerful, and giving voice to the voiceless. She became a beacon of truth and integrity, inspiring others to seek out the facts and stand up for what they believe in. The world had changed, but the fight for truth and justice continued, carried on by Sarah and Statham and by the countless individuals who had been inspired by their courage and their commitment to a better world. The journey was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. With the architect in custody and the organization in ruins, Sarah and Statham found themselves at a crossroads. They had achieved their goal, exposed the truth, and changed the world. But what now? What did the future hold for them? They stood on the shores of the Aegean Sea, the same sea that had witnessed their final battle. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow on the water. They were exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but they were also filled with a sense of accomplishment and hope. They had come so far, faced so many challenges, and forged an unbreakable bond. They had saved the world, but they had also saved each other. They had found love and redemption in the midst of chaos and danger. Now, they had to decide what to do with their newfound freedom. Did they stay together, continuing to fight for justice, or did they go their separate ways, pursuing their own paths? Sarah was drawn back to journalism, to the power of the written word to expose injustice and inspire change. She wanted to continue to tell stories, to give voice to the voiceless, and to hold the powerful accountable. Statham, on the other hand, yearned for peace, for a quiet life away from the violence and danger. He wanted to find a place where he could heal, to rebuild his life, and to atone for his past sins. They talked for hours, sharing their dreams, their fears, and their hopes. They realized that they had different paths to follow, but that their love and respect for each other would endure. They decided to stay together, for now, to support each other as they embarked on their individual journeys. They knew that their relationship would be tested, that they would face new challenges, but they were confident that their bond could withstand anything. They embraced a silent promise to always be there for each other, no matter what the future held. They knew that the fight for truth and justice was never truly over, that there would always be new battles to fight, new challenges to overcome. But they were ready. They had each other, and they had hope. They walked hand in hand into the sunset, two souls forever changed by their experience, united by love, and committed to making the world a better place. The end? Perhaps, but more likely, a new beginning.